Finding zeros from factored form without a calculator. Remember, zeros is when the equation is equal to 0 or when your y is 0 because it hasn't moved up or down any. It's just on the x-axis. So remember, those are your zeros. So in order to find these, if I gave you this, remember this is factored form because it has the parentheses that multiply to get the information. So again, remember you set it equal to 0, and then x minus 2 squared and x plus 1. So if I have this equation, I'm looking for when the parentheses or what number I can plug in for x that would make this equal 0. So if you look at this, I could plug in a 2 here because 2 minus 2 would equal 0. And even if I put a 2 in here, 0 times anything, 0 times 100, 0 times 500, 0 times 1 is always 0. So you can actually have two different solutions for these just because you can plug in a number here that would make this part equal 0 and 0 times whatever, it would still give you 0. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in a 2 just to show you. So 2 plus 1 is 3. And then in your calculator, if you type in 0 times 3, it's 0. So one of your solutions is 2. And I will show you an easier way to do this so you don't have to guess. And then another solution, I want to look for when this parentheses, what number I'd plug in for x that would make this parentheses become a 0. So negative 1 plus 1 equals 0, and 0 times whatever I put in here would still be 0. So your solutions or your zeros are 2 and negative 1. You should have seen that when we did the entry task, that the zeros were 2 and negative 1. Okay, so if you aren't able to just look at some of these and figure out what the zeros are, you can always follow these steps. So first step, set parentheses equal to 0 and set all of them equal to 0. So I'm going to set this first one, x minus 2 equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0. Because remember, I'm trying to find what number I can plug in to make this parentheses equal 0, because 0 times anything, it doesn't matter, would give you 0. Now, there is an x minus 2 squared, so I actually have 2 of those parentheses. And that's important for what we're going to talk about in just a second. So x minus 2 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. So solve like you always do. It's actually a pretty easy. So opposite of subtract 2 is add 2. Add 2. So then one of your solutions is 2. And then subtract 1, x equals negative 1. This one, of course, is going to be the same thing, but again, it's important. So x equals 2. Now, it's very important for you to notice that it's the opposite sign. If it's only a one step, like there's not a number in front of x, it's always going to be the opposite sign, because remember, instead of subtracting, you're adding. Now, I'm going to go ahead and graph this because I want you to see, oh, I forgot to write the second step. Solve each equation. Sorry, wanted to write down that step. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and graph these. X minus 2 squared and x plus 1. Now, if you notice, the type of zeros, and this is what we're about to talk about, is the types of zeros that you'll see, or types of zeros. Notice for negative 1, it just went straight through, and then at 2, it actually hit and then bounced off. Notice, since this was squared, we had 2 parentheses like that, so we actually have that 2 listed twice. So what we call that is multiplicity. So multiplicity, if the graph goes, oh, you can't see it, straight through the x-axis, the multiplicity is odd. If the function bounces off the x-axis, it has even multiplicity. In the trick that I always like to use, so the trick I always like to use is if it's a 2 or even, it's going to bounce off. If it's odd or just has a multiplicity of 1, it's going to go straight through. So 1 goes straight through, 2 bounces off. Okay, let's do one more. So if I have x minus 4 cubed and x plus 1 squared. So notice this parentheses happens 3 times. So you know that it's going to go straight through because it's odd. This one is an even, so it's going to bounce off. So I'm going to go ahead and solve. Remember, put each parentheses equal to 0. And then there's actually 3 of them. So there's going to be 3 of whatever this 0 is and 2 of that one. So then solve, add 4, x equals 4. And actually, I'm going to change this, sorry, just because I know one problem on your assignment is going to be like this. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 2 out here. Just so that it's like one of the ones on your assignment. So add 1, opposite of add 1 is subtract 1. So it'd be 2x equals -1. Now you have to divide by 2. X equals -1/2 or -0.5. Now, you're going to say this has a multiplicity of 4 and multiplicity of -1/2. So x minus 4 caret cubed, 2x plus 1 squared. That's weird. I'm going to zoom in. Okay, so now you can see it. You just couldn't see it when I zoomed out. So I hit zoom and then 2. Notice 0.5 was our first one, -0.25 or 0.5. So if you notice, since it was a multiplicity of 2, or we sometimes call it a double root, it bounces off. And then this one over here at 4 is an odd because there's 3 of them and it goes straight through. So that is multiplicity. That's what it means. Oh man, multiplicity. I wrote. That is not very smart of me. I'm sorry. This multiplicity is 3 because there was a cubed. And this multiplicity was 2 because there were 2 of them. So it's going, this one bounced off, and this one went straight through because it was odd.